I'm really delighted to get to spend some time with you and talk a little bit more about what we're doing at the University of Pittsburgh. So, just to begin, I want to say I think that we are all called to live in community. We're human. We're communal beings. And so we instinctually want to be with one another, and I think it's our duty to make sure that we all thrive. The whole lot of us, not just some of us, all of us. And it's why I do the work that I do. The fundamentals of community building are really not that hard, right? Interact with other humans, care about each other, improve your surroundings, be aware of when you need to moderate your own self so that others can have their well-being maintained. And yet we have to teach each other how to build community. I know I do that with my own children. When my son was 3, we had just recently moved to the neighborhood that we live in now, and we were out on a walk. And he saw a beautiful patch of tulips in front of somebody's house. And with utter glee, he runs at these tulips and 2 handfuls just rips 2 big, crushing handfuls of tulips off of their stalks. I mean, you can imagine the carnage that he leaves in his wake, and runs to me and so proudly says, "For you, Mama." And he was utterly heartbroken when he realized, through a little bit of coaching, a little bit of mama love, that that is just not what one does. And he quietly explained, "But they had so many, and I wanted to give you some." And so, of course, we had to talk about it's not nice to take from our neighbors, right? And then a little bit later on that summer, we had a bumper crop of tomatoes. And we decided that we were going to go and share our tomatoes. And so we take this basket of tomatoes to our next door neighbor's house. And I have to tell you, this gentleman was so kind. He was so wonderful. And he, is just, "Thank you so much. I'm so excited, but I don't eat tomatoes, thank you." And Joey, again, 3 years old, decides that he's going to argue the point, right? Which is like, the tomatoes are good for you. I grew the tomatoes. The tomatoes are delicious. He's getting into the action. And to this gentleman's credit, he stood his ground. "No, I don't want the tomatoes. Thank you so very much." Because I got to tell you, my son is cute, right? He can get that stuff past people. But I got to give him credit. He did not take the tomatoes. And so again, we had that little lesson, right, of we don't foist our gifts on people that don't have a need for them or don't want them. And so, this kind of community building is really at the heart of the work that we do. And I think that it's particularly important for institutions like ours, research institutions, premier academic institutions, to think about the role that we play in community building. So some time ago, I found this beautiful resource from the Syracuse Cultural Workers community. They developed it in 1998, and the artwork is by Karen Kearney. And I think these instructions are really important for us, right? So let's just take a quick peek, right? It's turn off your TV, leave your house, know your neighbors, greet people, look up when you are walking. So simple. Bake extra and share. Ask for help when you need it. Open your shades, sing together, share your skills, take back the night, turn up the music, turn down the music, listen before you react to anger, mediate a conflict, seek to understand. Learn from new and uncomfortable angles, know that no one is silent, though many are not heard, and work to change this. I think that these instructions are just as applicable for top-tier research institutions like ours. After all, the University of Pittsburgh, much like the University of Wisconsin-Madison, is tied to a geographic place. And as Paul Pribenow, the president of Augsburg College, once said, "Place demands our presence as a neighbor." So when we look at that how to build community and we apply it to our institutions, I think so many of the concepts crosswalk. Your house, know your neighbors, greet people. Well, just get engaged in the larger community. Look up when you're walking. Become aware of the community's issues and concerns. Sit on your stoop. Create better access to your institution. Play together, sing together. We'll marry the institution's agenda and those with those of the community. Buy from local merchants. Buy, build, hire locally. Share what you have, bake extra. Share your skills. Invest and partner your social and intellectual capital with your neighbors' efforts. Share resources. Have potlucks. Before you can do projects, you need to develop relationships. Take children to the park, honor elders, support neighborhood schools, garden together. I think this calls us to tackle real problems that affect the quality of life in our local communities. Fix it even if you didn't break it. Repair broken relationships between the institution and its broader communities. Read stories aloud. Acknowledge our shared history. Listen to the birds. I take that to mean slow down. Engagement is going to take time. Help carry something heavy. Acknowledge the disparities the community faces. Work with communities to address those disparities. Ask a question. Celebrate the tremendous potential of research and activate it locally. Ask for help when you need it. Collaborate and partner. Open your shades. Embrace transparency. Turn up the music, turn down the music, mediate a conflict. I think this one's all about knowing how you're affecting the community and being responsive to the community's concerns. And learn from new and uncomfortable angles. Well, that crosswalks for us to proceed with intellectual and cultural humility. And I think that last one doesn't need to be translated. But how does an institution learn to build community? How do you do this as an outside entity working in communities where maybe they are guarded against gentrification? How do you do this as a research institution in a community that might be bruised by exploitative research? How do you do this as a very well-intentioned partner who is comprised of tens of thousands of people, some of whom are very new to the dynamics of community engagement, or who may be unaware of the particulars of a specific community, or maybe the institution's history with that particular community? And how do you do this as a predominantly white institution when working in communities of color? These are the questions that are core to the work that I do at the University of Pittsburgh. As Dr. Ward said, I'm the Associate Vice Chancellor of Community Engagement. And wearing that hat, I'm responsible for all community-facing work. And in particular, I have had the privilege to come to an institution that is really serious about taking its role as neighbor and learning how to build community as an institution. So we at the University of Pittsburgh have developed neighborhood commitments. And we entitle these partnerships that build stronger communities and a stronger university. And what we mean by that is that we think that when our university is based in a place-based engagement approach, which I'm going to take apart in a minute, that we now open ourselves up to learn from and with our community. We know that our communities are powerful partners for innovation and learning. And we think by having this place-based infrastructure, it allows our faculty to have much better access to existing community connections and support to establish new partnerships. It allows our students more opportunities to learn from and with members of the community in preparation for their future professional and clinical practice. And as a whole, this institution that I come from is a more responsive partner. We attract and retain more community-oriented faculty, and we enhance our student experience, and we strengthen our core mission. We think our communities are stronger for it as well, because they get to combine their agendas, their wisdom, with our assets and resources. And we know that by creating greater access to partnership, expertise, connections, that we enhance work that's already going on in the neighborhood. Note that I didn't say that we are the ones doing the work. We're partnered, collaboratively enhancing that work. We know that community residents have greater opportunities for lifelong learning and health and wellness and employment and experiencing the arts through this work. But most importantly, the community as a whole has a much greater say in how Pitt operates in the neighborhood and how the university works to benefit the community. So what do I mean by this place-based strategy? Well, when you think about place, it fundamentally reorients you because you have to consider where you find yourself, right? You have to look down at your feet and you have to say, where am I today? What is unique about this community? What are the issues that face this community? What are the strengths and the assets of this community? And now what does it mean to take my learning about things that are very big and bring it down to a neighborhood level? What does it mean for me to take my research that is a national, global agenda of research and bring that down to a neighborhood level? And I don't mean lowering the expectations of that work. I mean honing it in. I mean getting specific. really making our work relevant? Well, to do that, we need a strategy to support that work. So for us, our neighborhood commitments is a three-part strategy. Dr. Ward mentioned it's a long-term commitment to key neighborhoods in the city of Pittsburgh. And that commitment is shaped and led by a network of collaborators. And it is grounded by a front door to the university right in the heart of the neighborhood. I'll tell you a little bit more about each of these. So our long-term commitment is an initial 15 years with 2 5-year renewable terms. It's a lease. And what that means is that a quarter century of investment is happening. That fundamentally reorients the conversation when you sit down with somebody and say, we'd like to be neighbors. We will be here for about a quarter of a century. What can we build together? How can we collaborate? It moves the conversation immediately from projects to collaborative agendas. The second is that we have an interested, educated self-stance. So I'll tell you a little bit more about this in a bit through this presentation, but it means that we come as a ready partner. We have invested the time, the capacity, and the resources to make sure that our folks are well prepared for what they're about to do. It means that we're thinking about long-term multi-site infrastructure. So in each neighborhood where we have these commitments, there are multiple points of long-term engagement, and it's not new. We're building on the infrastructure and investment and relationships that we've had for decades in those neighborhoods. And it means that we have a coordinated, connected approach. I don't know if this is the case here, but at our institution, sometimes our communities tell us it doesn't feel like the left hand knows what the right hand is doing. I feel like I may have been asked very similar questions recently. I just had a group of students that were doing a very similar project, and yet we don't always have that level of coordination and connection. And in the model that we're talking about, we don't just want to know what each other is doing, we want to leverage that knowledge so that we're more impactful on the long term. In terms of being shaped by a network, we are shaped by residents. We have a high priority to the resident voice in these communities. We recognize that it is very difficult to figure out not only who the community is when we in fact know that that's a myth, right? It's multi-layered, multifaceted coalitions of folks. And just because you live in a geographic region doesn't necessarily mean that you identify to that community. We also know that it's very difficult to identify someone who speaks for the community. And so for us, resident engagement is a priority. We are shaped by the long-term collaborators that have been working in these neighborhoods for decades. We take cues from what has worked. Often when I'm sitting with new folks to myself, I'm introducing myself, I'm trying to figure out what's going on, I often ask, what have your experiences with the University of Pittsburgh been like? Can you tell me about a really positive partnership that you've had? What have you learned from that collaboration? What do you need to see more of? And so that's a value that we bring into our work. We're shaped by our Neighborhood Advisory Council. So for every one of these neighborhood commitments, we have a council that's comprised of somewhere between 20 and 30 people. And we know that that's big. They actually come every month to the meetings. Again, 50% or greater are comprised of residents. The remainder might be community-based organization staff, faith leaders, elected officials, really key sort of organizers, community organizers in the neighborhood. And then we also have an internal advisory council that guides the initiative. So when we started the initiative, we figured out it has to be an all-in situation for us. For us to spend the amount of resources, time, intensity, and institutional will that it takes to carry this off, it meant that we needed to have full buy-in. So our Senior Vice Chancellor of Engagement, Kathy Humphrey, who really is the driving force behind a lot of this, she went to meet with each of the deans at every one of Pitt's 16 schools. And she said, how does having a neighborhood-based infrastructure help you to do the work of your school differently and better? How would it be to have supportive infrastructure to help your faculty, staff, and students develop collaborations and partnerships? What are we going to create together? And so this internal advisory council has representation from every one of the schools at the institution, along with a myriad of other centers and units, and they were specifically placed on the council as proxy to the deans. So these are people sitting in the room that can make decisions and move things forward for us. This is the place that we go to do a lot of the internal work that we need to do to make sure that we're a ready, able partner for the community. And then in terms of being grounded by a front door to the university, this is where our community engagement centers come in. So we are developing fairly large community engagement centers. And these are vibrant and welcoming spaces. They have staff who facilitate collaborations. They are accessible, and so you can access services and cutting-edge interventions, but they are just accessible in terms of space. So we equally share these spaces, community and university audiences, and they're a venue for collaboration and events. So who's involved? Well, I mentioned the Senior Vice Chancellor for Engagement, Kathy Humphrey. Paul Sepowitz is our Vice Chancellor for Community and Governmental Relations, and then there's myself. And then we have an infrastructure in both of the centers that allows us to do the work of propping up these kinds of partnerships and collaborations. And really, we see this as the opportunity to put our teaching, research, and capacity building at the service of our community. Now, it escapes me why not every one of those pieces of the pie is filled in, but I can tell you that really we're working across 5 different areas: enriched education and youth experience, economic sufficiency, health and wellness, strengthened cultural arts, innovation and business growth. So this is where we see the clusters of work happening. And the outcomes that we seek from these initiatives is that we want to build capacity, our own and that of the community. We want to improve the quality of life for residents living in these communities. We want our research to be far more relevant, community engaged, coordinated, and applied. And we want to be a better partner. At the end of the day, we must be a better partner. There needs to be greater access to the university. We need to be skilled in our collaboration. And frankly, a long-term engagement is really where this is going to pay off. So now I'm going to tell you a little bit about this initiative in the Homewood neighborhood of Pittsburgh. So Homewood is 3.8 miles from the university. It's a part of the city. It doesn't take very long to get there, right? As you can imagine, probably about 10, 11 minutes on a bus line, really close. There are so many people who live in the neighborhood of Homewood and who can actually see the skyline of our campus from where they live and have never been onto campus. They have not been a part of the University of Pittsburgh. So for us to make this kind of an investment and infrastructure and partnership and actually bring a front door to the university into the neighborhood is very helpful in terms of access. So the median household income in Homewood is about $21,500. Where about 29% of our residents are under the age of 18. Of those folks who are under the age of 18, 66% live in poverty. These are grossly over the city averages. So for us to do this work in this community, we need to recognize already this is not a lack of talent, intelligence, motivation. These are opportunity gaps that are deeply embedded in the structural inequities that live in our city. So we have to reckon with that right off of the bat and reckon with who we are as an institution. When we started to think about what this space and place could be, we realized that it needed to interplay nature and culture, economy, and place. And so we worked really closely with lots of stakeholders, and I'll tell you a bit more about that in a moment, to figure out what will that come together to be for us. So the content, the experience, the use, all had to be balanced. So here is a little bit about what that community engagement center looks like. So this is the exterior. This is the interior. As you can see, there's a very vibrant, open, transparent feel. The glass doors that you see leading into the classroom is a garage door that goes up and down. There's art throughout the entirety of the building. We believe that art is absolutely a pathway for relationship. And so the art that's on the walls is a level of portraiture for us that connects us to the streetscape. It's warm, hospitable. People can use it however they like. There's drop-in working spaces, conference room. There's technology throughout the entirety of the building. A computer lab that gets quite a bit of use. A science lab where we have quite a bit of programming. There's a historic Homewood exhibit that was curated by our local high school students. There's also coming online in the fall a wellness pavilion that's an interprofessional health practice unit that marries OT, PT, speech-language pathology, audiology, mental health counseling, and nutrition. Here's one of the nutrition spaces. This is the mental health counseling suite. We also have an education room dedicated to early childhood development. Here's some of the highlights for our programming at the Homewood Center. And you can see that these really range. Now, I want to be clear. Embedded in every one of these are community collaborations and partnerships. So we span from advanced manufacturing training all the way over to community-based participatory research, expungement workshops, we have poetry workshops, we have whole summer camps around STEM learning, we have parent workshops, small business development programs, interprofessional chronic disease management, digital literacy consultations. We do quite a bit around aging in place. It's a very senior-heavy community, and so one of the interventions that we have going on is Alzheimer's research with African drumming and dance. So lots of different work happening at the center. But I bet what you're really wondering is, how did we think about the community's wisdom and direction as we started to plan this? So this image really helps to situate some of that. So it all started off 3.5 years before the center opened. And 3.5 years before the center opened, the Chancellor and the Senior Vice Chancellor and others started to talk about this idea. What would it mean for the University of Pittsburgh to be a place-based, engaged institution with a long-term commitment? And so one of the first things that the Chancellor's office did was send out a request for partnerships. So it all started with partnerships. And that request for partnerships was sent really widely to almost every nonprofit organization you could think of, all of the faith-based institutions, most of the governmental agencies, the idea being, how would you have Pitt be in partnership in the city? And then there were a few town halls that were held, so about 3 of those, where anybody that responded to the request for partnership was welcomed onto campus. And again, this one happened on campus, and had a conversation with the senior level leaders of the institution. It was very important that they had that access to the senior leadership where they could ask any question that they needed to ask, what are the intentions behind this? If you are wondering if it was greeted with skepticism, the answer is, oh yeah, right? Why this? Why now? Why this institution? What's with this strategy? But then there was also a sense of hope and inspiration that there was senior level leadership taking it this seriously. Also a part of the room were the people that had been working for decades in collaboration on the ground in some of these neighborhoods. So it was this really beautiful grassroots, grass tops coming together and having a conversation. And they did 3 of those. And this whole premise was iteratively defined over the length of that. And I'll give you an example. So again, I mentioned that these are communities in both instances that are highly worried about gentrification. And so the university, as a large land-massed institution, obviously has grown its campus over the many decades that it's been around. And so there's a concern. What does it mean for a university to come to a community? Does this mean now that you've acquired property in this community? Is that a slippery slope? Now all of a sudden do you acquire a block? Now do you have housing? What does this look like? And so in those conversations, being able to really ferret through this, our Senior Vice Chancellor asked folks, okay, so if we don't own the property, what do you want us to do, right? Listening, really asking genuine questions. And what she heard was, we need you to come in and improve a community space. Leave it better than when you found it, but it's not yours. You don't get to own this thing. And so she said, well, if we don't own it, then who owns it? And the answer was, we own it together. So we don't own the property. We actually invest quite heavily into unutilized spaces. So the Homewood Center that I showed you, it was a weather-secured old market. By weather-secured, what I mean is it wasn't crumbling because the rain couldn't get in, but everything else, it had not been used in many years. And so there was a high degree of investment to be able to create a facility like that that would be sustainable. Then, from this town hall, there was an invitation put out, who would like to be part of the council, right? Where should we be and who would like to be a part of the council? And so we had this sort of partnering organizations and coalitions that wanted to be a part of the council. And the councils were again in Homewood and the Hill District. And I'll tell you why we got to those 2 communities, because we wanted to invest in places where we had had a long on-ramp to collaboration. So there were already a network of partners that were supportive of the idea of the university being a part of that. There were also people that were super skeptical, right? I already mentioned that. So in the complexity of that. Started out, we said, okay, if we're gonna make this investment in Homewood and we're gonna make this investment in the Hill District, let's have a partners council. And it's about at this point that I came to the University of Pittsburgh. So the Partners Council existed and I came in. And I started to ask a lot of questions about who got to be a part of the council and what are we gonna do with this council? And we started to have forums in each of the neighborhoods. And so we had 2 forums, planning forums, in each of the neighborhoods. And at one of the forums, one of the first forums, we had a very vocal, very concerned group of residents in the back that started with they don't speak for us. That's not part of my community. I don't feel like I'm represented. Where are the residents? And so immediately, it wasn't like, oh, maybe after the meeting we'll consider that. It was immediately, okay, let's try to figure out how to have more resident voice in this strategy. So I told you up front, we really prioritize resident voice in this strategy, and we made good on that. So very quickly, our partner councils became advisory councils, and I described for you what those advisory councils are, and those meet monthly. And then, in each of these neighborhoods, we worked with a master's level community-based participatory research class in the School of Social Work to work with our advisory councils, with our neighbors, all around a central question of, what would you have the University of Pittsburgh faculty, staff, and students know and do in order to engage effectively and respectfully in this community? And we very systematically met with lots of people of all different ways of being a part of that community, youth to the elders. And we asked that same question. And we came to a set of ideas, values, commitments that are really bedrock to what it is that we're trying to do. And the list of values and commitments and all of the things that guides, if you will, our community standards, they differ between Homewood and the Hill District. Now, you know this from being in this space, this really wonderful space where you're digging into community engaged scholarship and engaged research and engaged learning. There's lots of scholarship out there. There are lots of pieces of research that tell us how to be in community, right? We even have some authors sitting in the audience. Beth, her book is fantastic. Yes, we could have gone to the shelf and picked something off of the shelf, but for us in this initiative, context matters and the voices of our neighbors have to be prioritized. And so that's where we started. And from that came a set of resources that we now use to orient, to prepare, and to guide the work that we do. Over the course of those 3.5 years, we had more than 250 meetings in Homewood. We had just as many in the Hill District. And by meetings, I don't just mean office building meetings. I mean, I'm picking tomatoes in people's gardens, right? And we're having dinner at the kitchen table. Anyone who wanted to know about this thing, we made ourselves available. It was so important to us that we were able to be transparent and open and invested. And then we did 38 community presentations, again, in Homewood. So that's the kind of structure that we needed to put into place. All of this continues. Our advisory council still meets monthly. We have monthly open houses. More on that in a minute. So I talked with you a little bit about how we come to the table as informed partners, yes? And so some of this has to do with the fact that we were asked not to do any more needs assessments. So this is the question I get all the time. How did you know to do Homewood? How did you know to go to the Hill? And I get this a lot from other institutions. Did you do a needs assessment? How do you know what to do in these communities? And in reality, these are communities that have had a lot of assessment, a lot of research, a lot of planning, some of that internal, some of that external. And so we made a commitment. Fine, we will come to the table as educated, invested partners. So we reviewed existing community plans, needs assessments, policy, and technical reports. And in fact, our advisory council said, well, since you're educating yourselves, it would be really helpful if we could have an annotated repository of all of these reports. That would be helpful. Okay, so each of our neighborhood commitments maintains an annotated list of all of the reports, assets, all of these things that I just talked about. And they're numerous. And we segment them out in all different fashions and forms. So plans and reports by members of the Homewood community. Plans and reports about the Homewood community by external organizations. Plans and reports about the city of Pittsburgh that mention Homewood specifically. Plans and reports about the county in which there are things that are relevant to the neighborhood, right? It goes on and on and on. We consult our advisory council quite frequently with things that we want to understand and know. And then finally, we seek partnership and collaboration. So this is no more needs assessments. Come to the table as an educated and willing partner. I talked with you a bit about the CBPR project that we did, and I want to share with you one of the resources that came from that project. So in particular, this sense of wanting to make sure that folks in the community were regarded as co-equal partners, as having self-determination, assets and strengths that lived in the community really begged our attention. We needed to do a great job of preparing ourselves for that. And so I will share this with you.
really important to see a community for assets rather than just challenges because communities are complex systems. There's a lot that takes place. There are a lot of moving parts, and so it's really simple to just say community is bad. And you look more deeply, you're able to see the nuances and even some of the things not often highlighted in media that really speak to the strength.
One of the things that I hear a lot when working with communities are comments like, why do you think you need to fix it? Why do you think you have all of the answers? People are coming into the community not because of a lack of strength or a lack of assets in terms of cultural assets or social capital. It's a result of systemic opportunity gaps. What that means, partner.
But when you have the cultural wealth framework, and you're thinking about the wealth that exists there, it helps you really see the community for what it is. We kind of just see it based on what media tells us about the community. But when we have wealth kind of perspective as well, we can have a more accurate perspective of the community. I call it community acuity, right? The ability to see not just being just having your vision that which is challenging, but also
Every community has. So really, it is the onus of the person who is coming in their own filter and shift the paradigm so that they begin to recognize the wealth that exists within community. The fact that a community is still existing and thriving and resilient, testimony to the wealth, particularly when you're talking about communities of color. It is important that the strength of the community is not measured through a benchmark.
there's a navigational capital, right? So the ability to navigate systems that may be very different than what maybe one is used to, or processes and systems and ways that opportunities for individuals. I also think about aspirational capital, just the ability to have hope and expectation, and the ability, another capital that exists in terms of spiritual capital, right? The ability to have a belief in a higher power and use that as a source of strength throughout trauma and difficulties that may exist. Also think about legacy capital, right? So I think oftentimes in communities there's those who've been before who've really built strong institutions who've done great compelling force to move them
Necessary to develop and build relationships, partnerships. And one does not do that without recognizing that communities have and bring to the table. If one does not work with the community from a strength, then you're really not working with the community. Focusing on deficits is oppressive and paternalistic. Does not serve.
based approach essentially means looking not just at the negative, looking like Homewood is full of people, and people are gifts. People have strength. People have things to offer. Unique packages of things that are really powerful and unique and relevant. And so when you have the perspective of looking not just for those things that are theory or the things that are different in a way that is troubling, but more so looking for the people and what they're bringing to the community. Also, the institutions that are there. Different perspectives gives you really leverage to really interact and to engage in a meaningful way.
So that resource for us is one of a whole sequence of preparation and orientation materials that we utilize Some of them are multimedia, some of them are in person, some of that is textual, some of it is case study and interactive. But the point is, all of that came from the words of our neighbors, in the sense that those two individuals, Trish and Asohe, community partners that overlap with us, but they're community partners. So we do quite a bit of partnership development support. We have highly knowledgeable staff. We hired from the communities in which we are working, and that's really important. We participate in collective impact coalitions whenever possible, whenever we are invited to do so. And I would say that we are invited as a result of our long-term commitment, because people know that we're going to be there to build together. But one of the advantages to participating in collective impact coalitions is that it does not put the responsibility and burden of impact on just the institution, just the faculty researcher, just the student leader. It really puts us into an ecosystem of people that are working across sector, across organizational type, across community boundaries. And we have very strong philanthropic relationships. And I don't mean that to say that we've got a lot of philanthropy funding for this. What I mean to say is we are working in close collaboration with our philanthropic community, and often when they're trying to provide training and technical assistance in community spaces, they may help us to develop a partnership and vice versa. And so that's been really important for us. I mentioned the prioritization given to resident engagement. We are at all major and regular community meetings. We have monthly open houses. We have coffee with the director events. We have resident engagement staff. We're very resident-centered. And so all of this leads us to be able to do a whole lot more work, better work, in particular places to greater impact and greater effect. This is a tool that we use to track where we are and what we're doing. And there are thousands of activities in this tracker. But if you remember nothing else from what we talked about tonight, I want you to realize there is a huge difference between activity and community building. And all of the things that we have been talking about are guided by our community's wisdom in how to build strong, healthy communities and be an authentic part of those communities. Thanks so much for talking with me tonight, and I hope that maybe we can dialogue a little bit.